For this video, we're going to be in a different area. We're actually downstairs in my basement in my hunting room with all of my hunting equipment. And I was getting my arrows sorted and everything, and I just was like, why don't I grab my camera and explain arrows to you guys real quick? That's something that gets talked about a lot in the archery industry. There's a lot of misconstrued and misleading information. And I'm going to break this down for you guys so you guys can make the best informed decision if you're going to be buying your first or your next set of arrows. So without further ado, let's get into today's video. First and foremost, there are three main sizes of arrows that you're going to find on the market. And they're different sizes in their inner diameter and their outer diameters. They're ID and they're OD. And they're going to be ranked at 6.5 is going to be the biggest, and that's going to be something like this bad boy right here. This is just a blackout arrow. It's an old arrow that I've had forever. I think it's actually my buddy Hunter's, but anyway, they have a 6.5, and then it goes down to a 5mm. This is my dad's arrow. And this is a 4mm, which is my arrow that I built for this year. This is the best arrow that you can buy on the market, in my opinion, the VAB TKO Elite 300 Spine. But if you look at the difference between the three of these, and I'll put them in order from biggest to smallest, you guys can see there's a considerable difference from when you go down to this, from when you go down to this, down to this. So this is a 5mm or 6.5, 5 in the middle, and then the 4, and you can see the difference. Not a huge difference between the 5 and the 4, but if we take the 5 out, look at the difference between the 6.5 and the 4. You guys can see there is a considerable difference there in size. Now you might be asking yourself, well, what are the advantages when you go down in size, if there's any? And the short answer is there is a ton of differences, and there's a ton of advantages as well. So as you go down in size from a 6.5 to a 5 to a 4, the following are going to increase. Kinetic energy, penetration, and wind drift is going to go down. So kinetic energy is pretty simple to explain. So if I'm shooting a 70-pound bow with this 6.5 arrow, and I'm shooting a 70-pound bow with this 4mm arrow, that is 1.5 millimeters difference in surface area that I'm putting the same amount of energy into. So what I mean by that is I'm putting 70 pounds of energy into a 6.5mm inner diameter arrow, and I'm putting 70 pounds of energy into a 4mm arrow. Therefore, my PSI, pounds per square inch, is going to increase because I have less surface area but the same amount of energy comparatively. Therefore, I'm going to get more penetration. And then as far as wind drift, that's simple. As far as surface area, you know, if there's wind going across this, sorry for bumping the table there, if there's wind going across this and hitting this, that is less surface area for a 4mm compared to a 5mm. You guys can see the difference considerably there. I'll hold them both up so you guys can see what I'm talking about. You can see there's a significant difference in size. So as far as making the correct choice of size of arrow, 4mm is always going to be my best option and my first pick. Now, 5mm does just as well. I've killed a lot of deer with 5mm. I've even killed quite a few deer with 6.5. But the more I learned about it and the more I did the research myself, the more I told myself, hey, I can see the difference from watching other people doing it, and then when I finally tested it, I made that jump and that leap of faith to put into the equipment to make the decision myself to change sizes in arrows. And I started off with a 5mm and I loved it, and then I went to a 4mm and I loved it even more. And now for me, there's no going back. The biggest size I will go at all is 5mm, but if I can help it, I'm really going to try to push for that 4mm. Now we're going to talk about some other things that are kind of controversial in this video. Arrow weight, FOC, spine, everything. We're going to get into this video. It's going to be a little more in-depth and a little more informational. Like I said, I want you guys to have the best wealth of knowledge for when you go to purchase your next set of arrows. So FOC, what is FOC? FOC stands for front of center. And what does that mean? That means the percentage of weight overall that is actually in the front of your arrow. So if my arrow, this exact arrow that I'm building for this year, weighs 488 grains, I believe, 488 grains, and this is about 15.6% FOC. So 15.6 of my arrow, or 15.6% of my arrow weight is just in the front. For you guys wondering, I'm running a 75 grain insert with a 100 grain field point, and we'll get on to broadhead size here in a moment as well. But one thing you guys really need to pay attention to when you're building arrows is what your FOC percentage is, and it does make a big difference. The best way I can put it is FOC pretty much makes or break an arrow. You know, you can have arrows that don't have, you know, you have some guys, I should say, that love super high FOC arrows, 20, 25%, or you have the opposite that like 8 to 9%. Now, you might ask yourself, where should I personally reside for what I'm going to be needing as far as FOC wise? Well, it is from my personal experience, just my personal experience from building arrows and watching other people, that 15% is a perfect number to aim for. Usually 10 to 15% is where I like to be. Perfectly for me is about 15%, and I built these at 15.6. Now FOC, there's one thing that I feel like you can definitely overdo, and you don't want to overdo it. You know, if you have an arrow that's 25, 20% FOC, to me that's a little bit too much, and there's a lot of reasons why for that. You have to stiffen up your arrow quite a bit because you're putting a majority weight on a long shaft on one end of the arrow, and that can weaken your shaft. And it can also, if you have to, you know, raise your shaft spine, excuse me, if you have to stiffen your shaft spine in order for selection for that, you know, that broadhead and insert system that you're wanting to work, your GPI for your shaft is almost always going to increase when when you go to a heavier shaft or heavier spine, excuse me. So like if, for example, a 340 spine arrow might weigh, you know, 7.5 grains per inch, or a 300 spine might weigh 10.2. That's just an example for you guys kind of understand that a little bit better. Now, you might ask yourself, what's the big difference and why does that matter? Well, believe it or not, speed does kill, and I think that really matters a lot. You know, you have those guys that are, you know, die hard, you know, man, 550 grain arrow right through the pump house is always going to get them. That typically is true, yes, but what would that be a problem with? Is kind of what we got to look at. What's the trade-off if you're going for something that's so heavy, you're losing a lot of speed. Therefore, deer have very quick reaction times, so if you have a heavier arrow, your bow's going to shoot it slower, so deer might be able to react a little bit more. I'm shooting these exact arrows at, they're 488 grains and they're going 303 feet per second. Like I said, 30-inch or 30.5-inch draw length, 77 pounds. Now, 300 feet per second, we'll just make it simple math. 300 feet per second is 100 yards in 1 second. So if you think about that, a deer is going to have to be very, very fast in order to dodge that. Now, I'm not saying I'm going to shoot a deer at 100 yards, but let's just say 20 yards, okay? Well, think about 20 yards, how much faster it's going to be at 20 yards. That deer is going to have no time to react and no possibility of ducking my arrow. Now let's do that half of that. My arrow's going 50 yards in half of a second. I mean that's what you're doing. I mean, just you're snapping your fingers and it's there. Now when we get on to other things, you know, when we're talking about broadheads and everything like that, there's so many different broadheads combinations that you can go with. And I'll be honest with you guys, I am very strict on my opinions. I'm not saying that, you know, you can't shoot a 700 grain arrow and kill deer. I'm not saying that at all. If that works for you and that's what you want to do, great. I don't care. Good for you. I'm just trying to give you guys what I would personally do if I were to steer you in a direction, if I were to be selling you an arrow in person like we were in a shop. Like, I'm going to give you guys the best chance of success that I can. And for me, this is how I've done it, so this is how I want you guys to, you know, maybe just think about or take a look at. So when we're doing a different arrow, so we've gone over our arrow shaft, our spine and everything. Now we're going to talk about straightness. Okay, so we have 2 or 3 different types of straightness ratings typically when we look at arrow shafts that are bare. Okay, so you're going to get what's known as a .006, .003, and .001 traditionally. I'm not saying there's not any other measurements that are used for straightness levels, but that's what you're typically going to find when you're measuring your arrows. And what those measurements are is if you were to draw a perfectly straight line, I mean, like, it cannot get any more straight and it's just perfect. .006 is a 6/1000th of an inch from being perfectly straight. .003 is 3/1000ths of an inch from being perfectly straight, and .001 is 1/1000th of an inch from being straight. Now, the straighter you get, the more you're going to pay. The more match grade they're going to be, so that means that they're going to be closer in individual weight to each other. So if you were to buy a dozen match grade arrows, they're typically going to be, you know, let's just say a bare shaft weighs 250 grains. Well, each of those bare shafts should be very close to being 250 grains for each individual shaft in that dozen. That way they're the most accurate and, like I said, match grade. Eventually, if you guys are new into this might not matter to you too much, but you want your arrows to be, you know, really for me, I say within 3 grains of each other for long range shooting. Now, something that we have to talk about. We have a lot to talk about in this video. This is going to be a pretty long video, but Why would I want to buy a very expensive arrow that's micro diameter and is built for long range? Well, I'll tell you what, this is something that clicked in my mind, and I have told this to a lot of people, and I'm telling it to you guys as the viewer. Why would I not want an arrow that shoots an inch group at 80, inch group at 90 to shoot a deer at 20? If I can shoot an inch group at 60, 70, 80, 90, what do you think it's going to do at 20? It's going to be a lot smaller, a lot more pinpoint accurate, and accuracy kills. I cannot stress that enough. Accuracy, speed, penetration, and consistency kills. And I think you guys really need to pay attention to how you build your arrows. I have a video up here. I'm going to do a little bit better video. I filmed that one a while ago, but for the time being, I'm going to give you guys the one that I did a while back. It'll kind of give you guys a generalization of what you need to be looking at. But just definitely pay attention to that. Also, while I'm thinking about it, follow me on IG. If you guys haven't followed me on IG, I do a lot of updates on this channel on there, and then also subscribe if you're new. I'd really appreciate it. But now let's talk about broadheads. Broadheads, and then we're going to go to fletching and wrap and why I decide on all that. Okay, so let me find my broadhead arrows real quick. Give me 1 second. Broadheads, another thing that's super controversial. So when we talk about broadheads, that really is what makes or breaks, a kill. So for me, I love G5's my company. I'm telling you, G5 makes incredible broadheads. I've killed, I don't even know how many deer, turkeys, and all other sorts of animals with G5 broadheads exclusively. I've killed deer with muzzies and, ram cats and other, reputable brands, but I always go back to G5. That's my bread and butter. That's my roots, and that's where I've had the most success, and I support them because they support me. And they're just really great broadheads. So this broadhead specifically is a G5 Montec 100 grain. I always just go with a 100 grain broadhead for multiple reasons. One, it's standardized throughout the industry. You buy 125 grain, and 125 grain is becoming more relevant now. It was popular back in the 80s and 90s, and it died off in the early 2000s to teens, and now it's coming back with all of our FOC gurus getting back into the picture. But 100 grain broadhead, you can almost always find a 100 grain broadhead on the shelf of pretty much any reputable dealer of any sort of broadhead or arrow company, or just any archery shop for that fact of the matter. Now the con to that is everyone almost shoots 100 grain broadheads. I would say if you were to break it into a demographic sort of stance, I would say 70% of your people are going to shoot 100, 20% are going to shoot 125, and then that extra is going to be, that extra 10% is going to be 150, 175, 200, in that, kind of that oddball out type of way. But this is a broadhead that I like. Like I said, G5 Montec. Now, when we talk about broadheads, what are some, what's some criteria that we need to be looking at when we are buying broadheads? First and foremost, cut on contact. We want a hole as soon as that arrow hits. We want nothing mechanical to have to come into play. That doesn't mean that you can't use mechanicals, and like I said, I have a mechanical that we're going to look at here in a second. But I want cut on contact. Typically, I want a 3 or a 4 blade. Now, I'm not saying that you can't use a 2 blade like a single bevel, like an iron will or a helix broadhead or anything like that. But from my personal experience, when you get that second or that third blade in there, not the second blade, that third blade in there, that's going to make a little bit bigger wound channel. It's going to do a little more damage internally, and most importantly, it's going to leave a little bit more blood on the ground because the hole's a little bit bigger. Now, we all know, and we've all had it happen to us as bow hunters if we've shot deer with bows, that sometimes, one, we don't make a great shot, so that extra blade's an extra inch of cut, or a little side of cut, I should say. And two, if we shoot a deer, we might absolutely ding them right through the 12 ring or the 10 ring, and we know that they're going to die, but their hides are so thick, maybe it's winter, maybe it's just a longer haired animal, that extra slice to open that hole up a little bit more could be advantageous for getting on blood sooner, therefore finding your game quicker. I think that's something that you guys really need to think about, is a three blade cut on contact fixed blade. I have reputable brands that I really like to trust. Like I said, G5, Muzzy makes a great 3 and 4 blade. I haven't tried them yet, and if you guys want me to try them, leave a comment down below. But the Striker, G5 Striker, I've heard pretty good things about it, but they make a 4 blade out of that, and that might be something that I explore later on. But always in my quiver, I'm always going to have a Montec, and most importantly, my favorite broadhead, and you guys know I'm notorious for killing a lot of animals with these, and these are my favorite broadhead on the market by far, really no comparison, honestly, is these bad boys right here. So these are the G5 Mega Meat. Now when we look at broadheads, Everybody wants to think about, man, mechanical. That's kind of scary. I've heard horror stories. We got to think about what type of mechanical you're really hearing most horror stories from. First and foremost, they're probably not rear deploying like this one. Second off, they're probably not a very big cutting diameter. And third off, they're probably not very sharp and made out of good material. So this one is a 3-blade. It is made out of, the ferrule is steel and it has aluminum blades. Which, aluminum blades, I wish they would make these in steel blades. But, I will say with these aluminum blades that they do have, you guys can kind of see what I'm looking at here. That's all sorts of mean. This is a 2-inch cut diameter. Cut on contact with that bone breaking tip. I don't know how well that's going to do. I'll leave a video up here so you guys can definitely check that out if you're interested in wanting to know kind of some information about this broadhead, and I'll leave a hunting playlist later on in the video so you guys can check out some actual kills I have on camera with this broadhead, some blood trails you can kind of expect to see with this. But back to the broadhead part of it, we want something that's rear deploying, so when it hits that deer, it physically just slides down. It does not have to fold out, it doesn't have to break a band, it doesn't have to snap a collar in half. This does have a snap lock collar, but it just has to slide out. It doesn't have to break the collar, it just slides out of the collar. And typically, from my experience, first and foremost, this does break bone. My big buck that I have in the wall in the other room that you guys, there's a video up here, so many videos I'm just self-promoting here, but it's real information that you guys probably would find valuable, is I shot that buck, fully mature buck, in the middle of the rut with the thickest hide, toughed up, just bristled up, rutted up buck, right through both shoulder blades, and I watched him die within 40 yards. Less than 10 seconds he was alive, and he died instantly. So, and it was an incredible blood trail. Unfortunately, I can't show that on YouTube because of monetization rights and a whole bunch of other stuff, but this broadhead it's a performer, and I would take it on any hunt anywhere in the world, whether it's a grizzly, whether it's a moose. I would definitely trust this broadhead for sure. They make other great broadheads. They have the T2 that I'm hoping to get soon, so I can give you guys a review on that. But like I said, we're just going to go over strictly what I have and what I can give you guys from personal experience. What's the name of it? Give me a second. Sever broadheads. Those are the titanium broadheads. Those broadheads are also killer. I haven't shot a deer with those, but I did some tests on them, and they were very durable. They did very good. They shot through cinder block. They shot through wood. They just don't break. My only downside to that is they're kind of cumbersome to put back together after you shoot them and after they deploy, most importantly. But I just wanted to give you guys some information. Oh, I can't forget, actually. I almost forgot. You guys almost let me forget. Let's talk about fletches and wraps, okay? So when we talk about wraps and fletches, what should you guys be looking for? Well, it's really situational, but again, I'm going to go back to what I always revert to when I'm thinking about what I'm building my arrows for. I always build my arrows to be long-range death darts, because if they're perfectly good out, long range, what do you think they're going to do close range? So that being said, I'm running the Boning Heat. If you guys look, these are a longer fletch. I think these are 3-inch. Don't quote me. I don't know exactly how it is, how long these are, but these are a 3-inch fletch, and they are low profile. So compared to something like this, which is, I think these are 2.5. Yeah, that would make about a perfect sense. You guys can see the difference. But look how high profile these are. These are my father's arrows, and they work great. But my arrows would be a little bit better for long range shooting. But if you look at the profile on that, first and foremost, that's going to be a little bit louder because it's creating more of a whirl of wind when it's through motion and flight. And second of all, it's going to catch a little bit more wind due to more surface area. So that's something you guys really need to pay attention to when you're building your arrows. Make sure that you go with something that's a little bit longer but has a lower profile. It's going to do better at steering, in my opinion, and it's going to be quieter, and it's also not going to catch as much wind, so therefore it's not going to drift as much. Now with a wrap is completely optional. Some people love wraps, some people don't. For me, I've really started to like wraps because, one, I shoot a lot of deer, I shoot a lot of targets, I shoot a lot, and I have heavy poundage, and typically I shoot through the stuff that I'm shooting at, whether it's a deer or sometimes targets, or even just doing tests for random stuff. But I always want to run a wrap because it's easier to refletch and you don't get so much damage onto your carbon when you're fletching. And I also think that glue adheres better to a regular wrap compared to something that's carbon. So with that being said, I hope you guys got very useful information out of today's video. I just wanted to give you guys something that you could really pay attention to and rewatch. If you needed any more questions, leave them down in the comments. I'll try my very best to answer all of them in the most honest and truthful way that I can. That way I can give you guys the best chance for success. That being said, I have nothing else for you guys today. I hope everyone's doing super well. Subscribe if you're new, and I'll see you guys in the next video.